Yes.
Casey Crimmins.
Welcome, Casey.
Morning.
Woo! It's great to have you with us.
Right here,
audience.
right here live in the studio. Normally at this point I would kind of go through a great big spiel of, you know, who you are and what you've done and how
I would sit here very uncomfortably.
And you would sit
yes.
there very uncomfortably.
Yes.
You're here, so why don't you do this
That's
for
right.
our listeners?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And those who are watching, and
Yeah.
just introduce yourself a little bit. Tell
Absolutely.
us a bit about who you are, what you do around Charlotte.
Just before you get started, while you're collecting a thought, welcome
will.
Keith Graham. I got you on there this morning too.
Hi,
Great
Keith.
to see you, Keith. Of course, the Boyce family, Dr. Dale and Jan there as well. And if you are listening via the Melon app, which is what you guys are on right now, we always invite you to stay on after the broadcast and to be listening to heaven during our broadcast to pray over KC at the very end. So please stick around for that. It's always fun. And if you're looking at being a part of this, that's one of the beautiful things about the Power of New is we engage you in the process. So be looking out for that link next week if you're listening right now, because we'd love to have you as part of that as well.
Cool.
So yeah.
One more thing. Sorry,
Okay. We will get to the man, right?
We'll get
terrified
to you.
right
You
now.
just don't be terrified. I just got a text message through saying that my audio is really low. Do I need to stay closer to the microphone? Is that a better thing? Those who are on our call, give us a bit of a thumbs up or a no.
We're all good?
Thumbs up, I think I see from Jonathan. We're good if I sit forward.
Okay. All right, cool.
Good.
Very
to
good.
know.
Casey!
Take it away. Your turn.
Mark and Julie, so good to be in your home, your studio. My name is Casey Crimmins. I am the father of 4, husband of 1 for about 15 years. Her name's Tanya. Been in the city of Charlotte for about 12 years.
Wow.
Coming up, and background in corporate. I don't know if we'll get into that at any point. Used to work for GE Capital for about 10 years. Became a pastor in 2014.
Cool.
Then kind of went on this crazy journey of what does city networks look like, transformation, unity of the bride of Christ in a city. Had a passion about it. Found an organization called ForCharlotte, which I kind of dipped into pretty heavily in terms of just engagement. And then ended up coming to work for them part-time. I was co-vocational as a pastor and then leading in this organization, and then went full-time in 21, and now just at the beginning of this year became the COO of ForCharlotte, which is a network of networks across the city of churches and pastors. We say we connect pastors for personal, church, and city renewal, and in that order, that's kind of our theory of change, that healthy pastors, healthy churches, healthy bride of Christ blessing a city. And we do that through different types of networks. So we have pastoral networks, affinity networks, and prayer networks, 24-ish of those, 380-ish churches. And it's always ish. Networks are very ishy.
Right, they are. Yes, they are.
But yeah, about 380 of those, and just hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of pastors and leaders just connecting. Was at a prayer event yesterday with 65 to 70 of the prayer leaders of our city coming together to pray, bless our city, which is super powerful. So it's an eclectic role, eclectic job, but I've been doing it for a bit and feel like this is what I'm supposed to be doing for this season.
Well, I think that's what's going to make this conversation fun, because you represent a lot of our listeners, because some of our listeners are leaders of spiritual congregations and of whatever shapes and forms that they take in different parts of the world. Also a lot of business leaders that are involved as well. And of course, if you're involved in church or involved in business, there's a good chance you're part of a family. So you've got that element as well, being a husband and father. Plus that sense of, okay, you've married the corporate as well as the ministry, and now you're bringing that to a city to go, okay, learning all these insights that you carry into that, plus then what you're learning right in the moment. I think there's going to be a lot of places for us to dive in. But let's maybe start with that. So it was at Albany, New York. Is that where you started from? To Charlotte, North Carolina. So you've come from the northern mindset, which we've been out here in the States now nearly 14 years. And I've learned enough to know that the mindset in the north and the mindset in the south and the culture in the north and the culture in the south, they're not better or worse, but boy, are they different. Yeah.
Basically different countries.
Right.
And I came via Connecticut and Scottsdale, Arizona.
Oh my gosh!
To even get a little bit of the Southwest. That was where I was doing work for GE Capital, and it's almost like a weird extension of the Bible Belt, because you get there and there are a lot of churches, and there's a bit of that Christian culture, but nothing like what we experienced in Charlotte. We moved here in 2012.
Yeah.
Again, like a different country.
Right.
My word.
Funny story, just to show. I mean, my wife was 3 months pregnant.
Yeah.
When we moved down here, and we walk into the doctor, and the baby was upside down. So our daughter was upside down.
Yeah.
Breech baby, and we were going in for whatever the name of that thing is where they flip the baby.
External version.
And so we were literally in the city for probably less than 2 months, and we walk in, and he says, well, just before we get going, I'd like to pray for us. And I was like, what?
You want to do what?
I had just come from Connecticut, where they would rather just like hurry, like get out of here sooner. And he's like, I just like to pray for. Found out later it was Leighton Ford's son-in-law.
Oh my goodness!
Who I reconnected with years later. But it was one of those
That's
moments where I was like, what is happening in this place? So,
What a cool story!
Very different culture.
That is a great
Love
story.
it.
Yeah.
So let's then bring that down then into maybe the church culture for a second as well, because you know
I'm sweating already.
yeah, I know.
You laugh. What is it?
But something that we've noticed particularly is that the little bit we've had to do with the northern states is that, and ours has sort of been California and north more than anything else, is that the mindset and culture and lens through which we look and see God and see the world is probably more in alignment with how Australians see the world compared to the South, and the strengths and weaknesses with that on both sides. There is. What are some of the strengths that you've seen coming here to the South that go, oh my goodness, that actually is really, really nuanced, mature, and a great representation of God? How would you reflect on that for a minute?
The strengths of the South?
Yeah, the strengths of the South. Because we hear lots of people talk about, well, the South is lots of flowery words, but do people really mean it? And it can be really shallow. And, I hear that a lot from people. That's not what I'm saying. I want to be clear on that.
Yeah.
But I hear that a lot.
Right.
Yeah. Man, that's a great... I thought you were going to go the other way, and I was prepared. And now, coming out South was a dream, because I came to know Christ pretty late in life. Ended up going to a church in Connecticut, and I do remember the very missional thrust, because I'd go to work and people weren't pumped when we talked about religious things. In fact, if we did, asking to pray for someone was basically like going on a mission trip.
Wow.
And I had a couple of those encounters that were very supernatural. Like I just remember being like, oh my gosh, I got to pray with one of my coworkers, and I come down here and it's like, if you don't pray,
Right.
like who are you? What are you doing?
Right, that's true.
You call yourself a Christian?
Yeah, what is going on? I just remember going to restaurants here and be like, oh, everyone's praying. Oh my gosh, this is amazing. So I do think there is something of a spiritual deposit that the Lord's made, like heavy spiritual deposit the Lord's made in the cultural South. I do. I think the resources of heaven that has been poured into this place, maybe in a deeper well than we understand. Just that if activated, this latent potential, this latent investment, these resources. I mean, it's unlike any other area in our country. I mean, the seminaries, the churches, the ministries, the Christ-centered discussions that are happening, especially in the workplace. I mean, I look at some of those towers. I know there are people on the top floors of those towers praying on a regular basis over our city.
That's amazing.
That does not happen in other cities.
No, it doesn't.
I do think prayer is something of a resource that I was pleasantly, coming from yesterday as well. Like, I was in a room with people literally that I'm praying over the city for 40 years.
My goodness.
50 years.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
And now passing a baton to this new wave, younger, the intergenerational connectivity. But to your question, I do think there's just this latent potential, deeply ready, almost like static in the air, ready for that lightning strike.
Right.
That you don't necessarily get up in the north. In the north, you work.
Right.
Like,
that's interesting. You made a reference point last week to something similar, didn't you?
Which particular
When we were talking
reference
about the
did you-
rails and the metaphor of pregnancy and the rails. That's actually a very similar kind of a thing.
Very similar kind of thing, yeah.
So maybe for those who weren't listening, perhaps to bring a bit of a...
So a metaphor that I had last week, I was bringing a little bit of midwifery analogy.
And sorry, just remember a little close to the microphone for...
Yeah, I've brought it closer to me so that I don't
She's
have
amazing.
to kind of like, hi. The analogy that I used was in labor and birth, there is a particular feedback mechanism that the Lord has designed in a woman's body, that as the baby's head goes down, it sends a message to her brain to release the hormone that gives the contraction that pushes the baby down.
Yeah.
That sends a message to release more hormone to give another contraction. This is why labor kind of gets to that point where it's
intensifying.
It's a flywheel. It gets it
I've been through that 4 times. It's terrifying.
Right? So
And you didn't even feel the pain.
There's an actual feedback mechanism. The first time that a woman goes into labor, the body has to lay down all those pathways for the hormones to travel and build receptor sites that receive the hormone and send it on.
Yeah.
Right? So I liken it to building railway tracks. It's like you've got to lay down the tracks and you've got to build the station. And then you've got to lay down the tracks and you've got to build the station. This is why labour takes longer the first time round.
Right.
Why it's a whole lot quicker, mostly the second time round, is because the tracks and the stations are already built.
Yeah.
They're already there. So when it happens the second time, the body goes,
Yes.
there it is, and just
Yeah.
sends it down the line, and it doesn't need to build the tracks and build the receptor stations.
Yeah.
Well, we're talking about with the deep wells, with the latent potential that you're talking about. I'm kind of sitting here feeling that tension, that the tingles in the air. I'm kind of getting goosebumps while I'm thinking about it. We don't recognize the depth of what God has planted here. One of the other things that we've talked about on these podcasts, and I can't remember who we had the conversation with, but come back. The growing up of the wheat and the tares in the parable that Jesus talks about, where the farmer plants the seeds and the enemy comes in and plants the seeds, and the workers are going, do we rip out all the weeds?
Right.
And the farmer says, no, leave them all grow up together. What we look at in Charlotte and in this area, I think, is the wheat and the tares growing up together. If we focus on the bad stuff, because we're always prepared. We're always prepared for the bad stuff. We're always prepared for the weaknesses. We're always prepared to look for the evil that's growing in the world. But what the value of having you here and being able to speak to today, and the value of the question is, where are we strong? Where are we growing up? Because if the body of Christ is growing up,
Great insight.
in the same way that the evil's growing up, at the end of the day, it's going to be blatantly obvious.
Right.
Who are the mature Christians and where is the evil?
Sure.
We're not going to have to point to the evil to be wary, beware of the evil in the world.
Yes.
Just focus on growing ourselves
That's right.
strong. And I think we've got that happening in Charlotte at some level anyway, because otherwise you're not sitting in a room with people who have been praying over the city for 40 years, passing the baton on to another generation. That doesn't happen if we're not growing strong.
Right. Yeah.
So,
I'd say that's spot on. And I did sense welling up in me, I need to say, like, I honor the body of Christ in the city. Not just because it's my job.
Yeah.
Because someone asked me, we were having a conversation, just career path, whatever. And I was like, even if I had a different job that paid my bills, I would still be in this work.
Right.
I just happen to be in a season where those things are
converging.
Right.
But just the honor of the bride of Christ in our city, and I tell this to people a lot, because there are some times that the critique I'm bringing to whatever room or moment I'm in is more of a prophetic call to, like, hey, but it's here. Like, you got, like, come on.
Yeah.
Like, get rid of that. Like, we don't need that trash. Like,
Right.
get rid of the good stuff.
Yeah.
Because there is something stirring.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you guys have talked COVID and its impacts and implications specifically in this city, is that we saw the body of Christ respond.
Yeah.
We were literally, through relationships and connectivity, called upon by the city to help with that response. So my boss, the founder of ForCharlotte, Rob Kelly, gets a call from the city manager 3 days before the world shuts down and says, hey, we need your help because we've seen you mobilize people before for the good of our city. Could you do it again at a scale and a rate and a clip and a time period that we've never experienced before? He says yes. 3 days later, we're in the emergency operator center with like yellow vests on, running the VOAD response to the city.
Right.
Fast forward 3, 4, 5 months of coordinating and mobilizing and fundraising. We had to do the math on this because you have to report these things from a governmental perspective. So we have the numbers. 98% of those who responded to the need for donations, the need for volunteers, the need to feed people or care for first responders' kids, 98% came from the church.
Wow.
There you go.
The church.
Yeah.
And we put the call out to anybody. I mean,
Right.
the Jews for Justice and the all these nonprofits that we welcomed in, 98% came from the church. So I'd say another strength is I think there is a generalized understanding that if the city calls, we
will respond.
We're going
Yeah.
to respond.
So I just want to honor that.
Absolutely, and that really speaks to the health of what's going on here, and that's why, again, like I said, I hear a lot of those, negative sides of, well, it's the South and it's this and it's that and whatever. But there is so much positive that sits here. And I know for us, when we were looking at do we move to stateside as well, that was a really key thing. We were exploring. We didn't have the language for that around that time for what I'm about to say, but we sensed that something was an anomaly in this city, and you could feel it in a spiritual sense. And you guys have been referring to that already. And what we've come to know, the language of like a thin place in the spiritual atmosphere, because you can follow the revival history of this city. And just see that for a city that it's not by the ocean, it's not by a river, it's not like this giant trade route or anything like that. It's an anomaly city. It's not like it's the biggest city in America. It's starting to get there. It's growing at a pretty good clip right now. But historically, it's been more a large regional center rather than a giant city. It's not even the capital of the state, for goodness sake. And yet, when you look at the impact nationally and globally that's taken place from this very location here of Charlotte, North Carolina, it is off the charts in terms of the impact versus the size that you would expect.
Charlotte's given birth to, if you want to stay with the analogy, Charlotte's given birth to a lot of huge moves of the Spirit, of God, of Billy Graham, the Elevation Church. I mean, there's so many that you can name that that flourish in this area. Whether what has been birthed survives or not is actually not. That's not part of the question.
Right.
People have been giving birth, sadly, to children for years that don't survive. Just because it didn't survive didn't mean that it wasn't a good thing that was birthed by the Lord. And I know a lot of you listening will be able to just kind of list a few of those things off in your mind that have been unique to this area.
Right.
But here's the thing: when God's ready to birth something else, Charlotte has every railway track and every station already built.
It's a good word.
When it happens, it's going to happen. It's not going to take as long as it took the first times. It's going to be quicker because everything is laid and ready. And the earth remembers how that happens. And that whole verse, all creation groans for the sons of God. It's as in labor, as in, all of those verses that talk about that. When this happens.
I was on a online conference this week for about 6 hours, and there was, I think, about 450 people from 14 or 15 nations that were on this online conference. And the conference was around marketplace ministry. And it was put on by a large company around this whole thing and this whole conversation. And the CEO of this large company happened to go on to reference Billy Graham as well, and said how he had referenced that he felt that the next great revival was likely to come through the marketplace. Now, again, there's a general of the faith that sees from like 40,000
Yeah.
feet, and we see from like 10 feet comparatively.
Yeah.
Well, I had a similar conversation, and then some of our listeners will certainly know Nicky Gumbel, back probably about 7 or 8 years ago now, and had a chance to spend 3 hours with him one-on-one in in the vicarage at Holy Trinity Brompton in London. And so in that 3 hours, one of the questions, and I asked a lot of questions, as you could well imagine, one of the questions that I asked was, what was his opinion around this statement that the next great revival would come through the marketplace? Now, for those who don't know, the Alpha Course has, as it stands right now, has reached over 40 million people one-on-one. Their goal is by 20, that's right, their goal is by 2033 to have hit 100 million people. So that's and he wrote the Alpha Course. So for those who don't know, this is who we're talking of. Another clear general of the faith in the highest echelon. We sort of put him all maybe just around about a peer to peer with Billy Graham in some ways because of the impact. So when I'm asking that question, this is who I'm asking that question of, and what's his opinion about the next great revival would come through the marketplace? Well, Nicky didn't even draw a breath, and he said, absolutely, I have no doubt whatsoever that's where it's likely to come from. All the things I see and hear on the ground, all the indicators point to that, where I see where the Alpha Course is having great impact. Well, yes, it partners with churches. It's a lot of marketplace people that are coming, and what's going to happen? They're going to spread and head back in. And one of the questions that was follow-up was, I said, well, okay, if you're talking to yourself at my age, what would you say to yourself knowing what you know now? And he said, spend every waking moment with a marketplace leader that you possibly can. Now, again, these are interesting conversations around that. I want to sort of just move across and pull some of these strings together for a second, where we've got these rails of the new thing. We hear from someone who was born and bred and died and buried here in Billy Graham, the likes of a Nicky Gumbel as well, and the things that we see. What are your thoughts around that subject matter of there being a lot of potential in marketplace? And is Charlotte possibly one of those places, given its history and its story, where that could launch out of? What are your insights, and what do you hear and see?
Yeah. I don't know how else to, how could it not? I guess is the better, and I don't mean that, I don't mean that in any type of, just to agree with these generals, and this is what we hear all the time. How could it not? I think because you just look at where we are. Look at society, look at the rhythms of life, look at where we are, even as a city of churches, one of the most church per capita. I don't know if we're still holding on to that. We're definitely top 5.
Right.
Yet we're also one of the financial capitals of the country.
That's exactly right.
And that happened in the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
I have more interesting, I want to say more, but more interesting conversations with my marketplace leaders about how they are sensing and moving, especially in the moves of generosity, because we love to talk about these very generous businessmen. But then also it's like, dude, but you're brilliant.
Yeah.
Like God has given you strategy.
Right.
I mean, some of these guys run organizations 500-600 people.
Yeah.
Some global, and you're sitting in Charlotte going, I just let me give my money away. I'm like, yes, don't get me wrong, do that, but yo,
wow,
what else are we doing? And to hear that there's an innate, not just desire, but they are practically walking out their faith in ways in their workplace. That I don't know that they are fully comprehending is fully kingdom.
Right.
How they care for their employees, how the end game of whatever the product or service is doing. Man, we want to see lives impacted by whatever. I'm like, dude, you're a pastor.
Right. That's right.
Like, holy cow, look at what you just did. He's like, well, I'm giving away money. I'm like, that's great. Again, thank you. And you are
so
a
good.
kingdom warrior.
Come on.
Like, let's make sure we appropriately understand that is actually a higher calling than just the giving resource. So I would say, how could it not?
Right. Great insight.
How could it not?
Yeah.
I guess that kind of begs another question to go a little bit deeper, and it's probably a little bit of a controversial one, and one that
We love controversy here at the Power of You. You should know that by now.
That's not my contract.
So traditionally, the church has not recognized, validated, or sanctified the business side of things being, like you've just said, these business people, they're pastors. They're making an impact in the kingdom. And certainly from, in our experience as pastors of the traditional church model, meeting on a Sunday morning in a church building, having the ministries, doing all the stuff. And we know we've walked this. Pastors are generally threatened by the business leaders who get out there and do all of that stuff and have that great impact. But one of the things that we've been able to walk out, and one of the things that the journey that the Lord's taken us on, is to recognize that while the traditional church model has its place and is very important, I'm not saying that we should dispense with it by any means.
Right.
While that is very important, we're missing almost like the church is the hand, but we've cut off all the fingers. And if we don't have the fingers, what good is the hand? And we need to actually bring all of that together. The business people are kind of they're the articulation of what the church is. I don't know that I'm kind of formulating a question. I'm just kind of putting a thought out there, I guess. And what comes to mind when you...
I think we have an issue, and this could be totally wrong or this could be spot on, so we'll see.
Okay.
I think there's been an issue in defining the terms.
Right.
Of what are we supposed to be doing out here?
Yeah.
Because if our historical understanding is conversionism, if kingdom expansion only looks like how many people raise their hand, get baptized, join the church, begin to engage in the local church,
pray the prayer and serve.
If that is the only metric of success, then what do I need a business guy for?
Right.
Other than just to fund
that's a great insight.
If we are moving our definitions from kingdom expansion and that to a reconciling all things and not just conversionism, I think then the marketplace guys have way more to offer. But if our historic grid remains conversion, membership, engagement in and fueling the local church's ability to do what it's doing on a weekly basis, then there is a threat. If we see the bigger narrative, the meta narrative of that Jesus is going to renew all things, then the marketplace has to be. That's why how could it not?
Right.
And even for ForCharlotte, just to go into a very interesting season that we find ourselves in. We've been in the city for about 10, 11 years. Really, in the last 5, 6, 7 years, our engagement of churches, depth of engagement, cross pollinating of different things we call network effects are taking place. Trust that is increasing, trust both in and between the churches that engage with us. We are realizing that as we focused, we have expanded into more conversations that are crossing those lines into marketplace, nonprofit, civic. And the question that we're getting is, can you help be more kingdom ecosystem architects for the city?
So that's a good, just use that word again, because that one might have just flown past, but there's a lot of significance around what you said.
Kingdom ecosystem architects.
Unpack that phrase for us a little bit. I think there's a lot of meat on that. There's a lot of meat on them bones.
There's some juicy bits in there.
Well, I think again the recognition and realization of the better terms, I should say, the more holistic terms of what Jesus came to do through the expansion of his kingdom. And that ecosystems is more of the understanding versus, and I understand like the lanes or the spheres or whatever, but ecosystem feels more organically what's actually happening.
It says that the points actually they're joined together, they're interlinked, they cross over.
They're not silos, they're not standalone.
Because there's this beautiful thing, even in science and the world, is that where two ecosystems touch, and this is where my nerdiness comes out just a little bit from that I've gleaned from my boss, where those ecosystem touch are called ecotones. And inside of ecotones, you find a robustness of life and things that could only exist inside of these places where two ecosystems are touching. So think about like, a rainforest touching a desert.
Yeah.
Right. As that there are literally only animals that can live in that
That's
place,
right.
and types of wildlife
Yep.
that can only exist in that
Yep.
place. So you take the ecosystem of the church. You take the ecosystem of the marketplace. You take the ecosystem even of the nonprofit space, kind of the
Yeah, that's
the
right.
doers and the getters
Yeah, yeah.
done. Where those touch
Converge.
and converge, you get the right people sitting at the right tables at the right time, architected. So architecture is really important to us.
Right.
Right.
Architecting a table, architecting a room, architecting an organization. The kingdom is flat. It's non-hierarchical.
Right.
And it's usually upside down.
Right.
Yeah.
So how
That's
do you
right.
architect
Exactly.
that from the beginning to say we are here to serve our city, not to lead and triumphantly take over.
Right.
We are here to serve
Christianize
our city.
it.
Yes, and at this very flat table
Yeah.
where everyone appropriately brings their ego and their logo. You don't check those at the door. You
Yep.
appropriately bring them
Yep.
into the room. That's where this ecotone and discussions of, hey, we're realizing the Lord's kind of doing the same thing in all these things. How do we coordinate efforts so as
Love
to
it.
not duplicate,
Yeah.
be overly replicating things that could be, and saying let's see how we work together,
Right.
as opposed to us siloing ourselves out,
Yeah.
even within these ecosystems.
Yeah.
And that's exciting.
And,
So-
that's completely
Ecosystem.
countercultural, because at the moment we're talking everything we read in the news, every politician we listen to, it's more about the division and actually propagating division.
Yes.
So the language is very polarizing. It's us and them. It's it's white or black or Hispanic or yes or no or gay or straight or it's just whatever these
One or the
languages.
other.
We've got to find some way to differentiate ourselves from others. And again, as we've said before, we have strong opinions on some of these issues. But but the bottom line is that what it does is every point of division, we strip away a bit of the humanity from somebody.
Yes.
And a division dehumanizes. It does, and it actively dehumanizes because it takes them apart from community.
Yeah.
By nature, they end up forming these other communities that become their own communities, which can be unhealthy or whatever. But the bottom line is that what we're needing to do is actually bring some synergy and cohesion back together. If nothing else, around the fact that we're all on this blue marble together, and we've got that thing in common.
Yeah.
And therefore I can learn from you and you can learn from me, and now we come back. Now we transfer that into this context that you're talking about, and going, all right, well, you got civic, you got your government, you got maybe healthcare, you've got your marketplace, you got your church, your not-for-profit, and all these different spaces, educational spaces perhaps there as well, and all these different things, and going, well, let's not be divisive, let's not be polarizing, but in these, what did you call them? They were tones.
Ecotones.
These ecotones, these places that go, man, together
Yes.
we can learn from each other.
Yeah.
And in actual fact, what do? We start to get social cohesion
Yes.
because we've got cohesion between things that are historically being divided.
Yes.
Then we actually start to shift the needle a different way.
Yes. And we actually fulfill the prayer and promise of Jesus, which undergirds everything that ForCharlotte at least is about in terms
Right.
of this unity
Yeah.
that we're not working for, we're not making happen. Like Jesus did all of that.
Yeah.
Our job is to create places for it to be experienced and expressed, and we're finding these ecotones are moments where we start to look around a table and go, "Did you guys just feel that? Did you just,
Right.
Did you see that?" And it's the architecture that goes into it, and it's
Yeah.
like the lower we go, the more servitude positional place we take,
Yeah.
the more favor and the more robustness of things that begin to sprout out. So it has been an interesting season to watch some of that.
If you've just joined us here at the Power of New, we're with Casey Crimmins, COO of ForCharlotte here in, of course, Charlotte, North Carolina. But Casey's a dear friend of Anothen, special guest, and just having a wonderful conversation right now around this subject matter of how do we get this cohesion of all the parts that make up a city and bring them together. and we're talking about eco-tones and getting all of the different, your civic, your educational, your healthcare, your church, your not-for-profit, getting them working together for the common benefit of the city, and comes with some great experience both in the marketplace space, in the church space as a pastor, and now also in this broader space of networks, bringing people together across different churches, denominations, races, groupings of whether, again, be civic or whatever. Bring all these people to the table for conversations around building healthy communities that are strong, that we can actually then see Jesus in the middle of. There's, as we talk about this, I want to bring some more clarity of language, because the Bible talks in very uncomfortable terms quite often, and probably equally as any other subject in the Bible is this one when it refers to nations. And Jesus says, on that day, I will separate the nations as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. Now, in some spiritual leadership circles, the language is used about goat nations and sheep nations. Oh, wow. So, okay, he's talking about two very different types of things. We then go over to the Great Commission. Now, what we've found with the humanist side of things is that we've reduced this to the irreducible minimum of just personal salvation. Yeah. But Jesus says, go into all the world and make disciples of nations. Yes, it involves people. Yes, it involves personal salvation. But that's just an entry point. There's so much more. And then we see over in I think it's Psalms 2:8. Ask, and I will give you the nations as an inheritance. Some have said that's a messianic psalm, and it's a prophetic statement that Jesus will be given the nations as his inheritance. So the Bible talks about nations. Yeah. We tend to talk about salvations, and whereas he's saying, no, we've got to zoom out because there's this much bigger thing that's at play right now. If we were to use the language, okay, goat nation, sheep nation, what are the pieces that you think, in light of the conversation we're having, that actually helps a nation that may be on the goat side of the ledger take a few steps toward becoming on the sheep side of the ledger?
Wow.
Yeah. Have you had any chance to think about this at all?
I did not read that book.
Is Casey Crimmins on the spot?
That is on the spot.
Well, let me zoom into a city and then I'll blow
Yeah,
up to a nation.
okay,
Because
cool.
let's be honest, there's some cities in our country that are literally the size of nations.
Right, that's true.
And this concept of how do you disciple a city? How do you disciple a nation? How
Right.
do you move them along this journey of
Yeah.
whatever that might be?
Yeah.
And I think that there is something to say, because I mean we're talking Christianity, so there's something to say with what is happening at the ground level in the church, the ecclesia of people that are saying, hey, I'm following Jesus. And what's the frameworks that we're welcoming them into, both infrastructure of churches, infrastructure of connectivity. And I think this is where this last move in the last 15, 20 years, this city movement is really new.
Yeah.
And understanding that there's a level of serving and there's a level of shaping in all of this. There's a level of serving a city, serving the bride, serving the needs of a city, but then there's also the meta narratives of a region, of a nation, that at certain levels you can actually help shape. So is it going to be architected for division? Is it going to be architected for competition and comparison? Is it going to be architected towards the things that we would say are very unkingdom-like? Or are they going to be architected?
Great insight. It's a great insight.
This is like really important for us to understand.
Yeah,
like,
it is.
Rooms are architected.
That's right.
Meetings are architected.
Yeah.
Companies are architected, and then onward and upward, and that there is something to be said for those that find themselves, because there's no better or worse, whether you're 10 feet off the ground and serving the least of these, hands-on, get your stuff dirty, or sit in the upper echelons of, moving nations.
Right.
There's architecture in how you do those things, and I think that the goat to sheep has to do with how are we architecting those that get in the game, because at the end of the day we are creating those spaces and places for them to enter in, and if we're entering them into bad architecture,
right? Yeah, that's a great insight, Casey.
Yeah,
really is.
They're only going to go where the design allows them to
it's
go.
Like the blueprint.
Yeah.
Right? You give the blueprint to the builder, and you go, hey, make this.
Yeah. So I think a great takeaway question already from there is, what are you building? Within your organization, within your church, within your family, what are you building? Are you building with the right architecture? that actually brings wholeness and hope and freedom and life?
Yes.
Or are you building architecture that's selfish, that's divisive, that seeks to tear down so that only you benefit? These are really, really good questions to start to hold up as mirrors as a leader to your, in your own right. The first person that we have to lead is to lead ourselves. The Bible calls it self-control. Another word I think we can use is self-leadership, because we're learning how do I lead this thing that stares back at me in the mirror every day? But what are we building? I love the language of architecture. It really resonates. When we were looking at Anothen media, we put it this way: the Anothen media, we were lovers of the story, we are architects of trust. And this trust architecture is what gets built. And you've talked about the narrative. The story matters. Yeah. So when we dive into the story, and you've spoken as well about honor. We've honored the story. So we recognize the story that's been is what helps us to be where we are right now. For the good, the bad, the ugly, the celebratory, all the things in between. Right. But we honor the story. And then our stories make sense in terms of this meta-narrative, this grand narrative of God that's playing out. And we see that our story starts to make sense as it plugs in. It's not lost that Jesus, one of the names he had, is Alpha and Omega. For what does that mean? He's the beginning and the end. Great, but beginning and the end of what? The story. Here's the opening statement. Here's the concluding remarks. And here's everything in between. And then our stories make sense in light of that. So this architecture, I think, is very, very important as we wake up every morning and look in the mirror and go, well, what am I going to build? Am I going to build something that actually brings social cohesion and benefit to the story? Or am I going to do things that actually dismantle the story and tears it apart to build a false narrative?
Right.
I think the word architect also brings with it all of those connotations of intentionality and creativity, yes, perspective and precision. That's the word I'm looking for.
I could see it right here. Right there. She wants that word. I'm going to give it to her.
Yeah,
let's just struggle.
Well done.
Thank you for that. That's awesome.
Excellent.
The precision that's there. It's not just let's just draw some lines on a paper and go. When an architect designs something, it is very precise. It's precise to scale.
Right.
It's precise
great
to
insight.
to everything. Every line that he puts on a page is meant to be there. And when we use the word architect, we're architecting all of these things. We're needing to learn how to be as precise as we can be. Intentional and
that's good.
The pursuit of that excellence. It's that was just
great insight.
Thank you for helping.
We're getting not close to our time, but I want to make sure we have a couple of questions here. One of those is that we here at Anothen, we like to use the word fresh-demony, a fresh story or a fresh testimony of what the Lord's doing right now. Particularly, we've been talking about architecture and changing cities. How do we maybe shift the needle on a nation? All of those sorts of things. That's broken down into individual stories of a God at work in the lives of people now. Is there anything that jumps to mind if I was to ask you, what's a fresh testimony where you've seen God at work recently?
Well, this past week, and yes, I was prepped on this question.
No, this one you were.
I've had a little bit of time. There's actually this last week coming off of the Labor Day weekend, I got to go out to Colorado, Estes Park, and there's a convening of people that happens every year. Now it's 3 times a year because the group is growing so much. But basically, the me's of other cities. So from Orange County to Seattle and Portland to Dallas to cities you've never heard of, to Tucson, to the Northeast, to the East, to South Florida. I'm just like thinking of the people that are sitting in the room. These are the me's and us's of these cities, and I was there 2 years ago. I was there last year, and I was there this year. And someone that's been doing this a very long time in Oklahoma City, I believe, said, as we were just kind of go around talking about what we're doing, the stew is thickening. The level of sophistication and language that is coming forth from these city conversations, the shared language, the whatever, like there, and this is scale on scale. These are city leaders, movements from across our nation sitting together saying, and first of all, it's super fun. So, don't get it twisted. We worked a bit, but it was fun. We're up in this beautiful part of the country, but the sense for me, the fresh testimony was like a affirmation of this work, because sometimes I'm out there and I have to explain to everyone, what do you do? And I'm like, I lead a network of networks. What does that mean? With this group, I don't have to explain, which is nice.
Yeah.
But this sense of a communal moment where even though we are on day one of what this probably will end up looking like in the next several decades, God is actively across this nation bringing high caliber leaders. I mean, these are smart, sophisticated, business background, church background, whatever.
Yeah.
To say, what does a city level interconnectivity, mental model, mental map of an architecture look like that can shape a nation in this country?
Yeah, they're good questions.
Got to do that last week.
Wow,
Yeah.
and they're great questions. They're the questions that matter. I got to journal some years ago around David Goliath. The great story as we all know so well. One of the things that stood out to me was that David, he turns up onto the hillside that day, and career soldiers are sitting there asking the kinds of questions that career soldiers would ask when they're confronted with a giant and the people that are all behind him. And, well, how are we going to take him on? Well, I don't know. How are we going to? What do you think? I got no idea. Well, why don't we go down there together? Are you kidding me? Have you seen the size of that guy? I'm not going down there. And these aren't scaredy cats. These are career soldiers, and they're asking questions backwards and forwards, wondering what on earth do we do? How do we take them on? They don't have anything. In walks David, the youngest kid on the block, here to hand out a bit of food, and he asked the one question that nobody else is asking, and he asked this question: who is this that dare defy the God of the armies of Israel? Now, the takeaway for me was, out of all those questions being asked on the hillside that day, his was the only question that reached the king's ears. And I remembered as I journaled that, I thought, there's lots of people in the space that I'm operating in, and they're all asking sensible questions because of the space that they're in. They're not even wrong questions, bad questions. But what questions am I asking? And I sat back and I thought, I want to ask, while I've got breath in my lungs, I only want to ask questions that reach the king's ears. Yeah. They're the questions I want to ask. And most times I don't even know what the question is. So I have to start and go, Lord, what question do you want to put on my heart to bring to your ears? When I hear you talk about those sorts of questions that are being raised, I believe they're the questions that reach the king's ears. They're the right kinds of questions. They're the questions that go, well, how do we change this city? What does it look like? What piece have you got? And what bit have you got? And how are we learning? And what have you learnt right where you are that we can then take and bring to our key people across our different spheres within our city as well? And what can we do with that? Then we can bring back next year to learn and grow. And I sit there and go, the king's going, yes, these are the right kinds of questions. Well, look at my kids down there. Everybody, heaven, gather around. They're asking the right kinds of questions, because these are the questions that are shifting the needle on nations. They're the right kinds of questions. So I love that, man. That is cool. What a fun room to be a part of. I love that. Well, now the most important question. Joel, do you want to ask the most important question today too?
In the spirit of new, because, we're called the power of new. It's what is new and what is working. In the spirit of new, what was the last thing you purchased online? And why? Again, prep for this one, thankfully, and I didn't go through my Amazon orders to check, but I will say, I'm gonna cheat a little bit because my wife ordered it, but it's something worthy of at least sharing. So I show up at home. I've been gone all week. All of a sudden, Amazon comes to the door, which is like my worst fear. Every time Amazon rolls up, I'm like, okay, what did we spend?
What happens?
What did we do?
What hit did the credit card take?
I love you, Tanya. There's one of those battery. There's a lithium battery. I'm like, oh gosh,
this is expensive.
So I open up the box. And what is this? It looked like earphones. She goes, oh no, it's a personal cooling system.
Oh.
So it's a little neck band that goes around you and has fans with like a little mister that cools
My
you
goodness.
off because we are in the middle of soccer season. And down here in Charlotte,
gotta
North Carolina,
sit.
it's still pretty hot out there.
That makes
So
sense,
to
doesn't
sit
it?
on the side, because she said she saw a mom at the last game when it was 96 degrees, 95 degrees, not sweating. And she's like, "What's going on? What is this?" She's like, "Oh, you gotta get it." That's what it was. A personal cooling system from Amazon.
Every soccer mum in earshot of this.
But
is
you
going
really-
to
yeah.
be
Enter
looking up this.
promo code KC Crimmins.
That's right. There's going to now be a big run on personal cooling devices. That is a great item to purchase.
Isn't
fabulous,
the
man.
world an amazing place where people can come up with things like that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It had to have been a soccer mum
Yeah.
It was
sitting
a
in
soccer
98
mum.
degrees
Right.
that would
Brilliant
sit there and
engineer.
Go, I
Oh,
need
yeah.
something that
Well, do you know
sits
what?
around my neck.
I'm thinking for Christmas Eve this year, we might need the revert. So I
Oh,
wonder if
yeah.
they got personal heaters. This last year at Christmas in the barn here
that's
in Charlotte, it was freezing
And
cold.
the hand warmers were not
They
doing
weren't
it.
doing it.
They
then.
were not doing it.
Yeah, we
The
might have to go and look to
musicians
see
were
if they
really
got warm
suffering.
ones you can stick around your neck just to keep your face warm.
No,
This has been great. Well, I think we got next week here at the Power of New as well. Let me find down here. We've got, yes, we have. We got Tony and Amy Pesos next week. Dear friends of Anothen, let me just read a little bit about them here. Amy and Tony Pesos bridge nations between the US and Brazil. They empower leaders for lasting impact. Through their Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy, Team Pesos Jiu-Jitsu and Dream Root Leadership Institute, they uplift underserved communities worldwide, catalyzing growth and change. With diverse expertise and a shared passion, they make God's kingdom a reality, all the while savouring life's simple joys. Amy holds an MA in Global Affairs with a concentration in Economics and Development, a BS in Business Administration, and a certificate in Organizational Development. Tony is a 4th degree Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt and a personal coach. My word.
Okay.
Don't get
on his
Boy, oh
console.
boy. They are passionate to see God's kingdom made manifest and all people be given the opportunity to rise to greatness and fullness in Christ. Again, just like we've had with Casey, another amazing insights and things we're going to get to hear from people that are on the ground. They're busy doing it. What are they doing like you? Shifting the needle on nations. Not just theorizing. We need to talk. We need to have discussion and conversation, but on the ground, building architecture, working into lives across nations. This is an exciting time to be alive.
It really is. And one thing I think I just want to say in closing, the encouragement that we need to be able to take from these kinds of conversations is that the problem's not too big.
No.
And the strategy that Jesus gave us when he said to 12 individual men standing on a hillside, 11 individual men standing on a hillside, go into all the world and make disciples of nations. Their understanding of the word discipleship, I think, is very different than what ours is here
I
in the
agree.
West in the
Boy,
20th,
oh boy.
21st century.
Isn't that truth?
Making a disciple means gather the people alongside of you, walk out life with them, build relationships with them, get to know them and teach them how to live, how to do all of the things I've commanded you, love God, love people, love each other as yourself, all of that stuff. Every one individual person following that strategy shifts the needle on a nation.
Yeah, amen.
The encouragement that we need to get from these kinds of conversations is that one person can make a difference. One person can, in relationship with God, walking with the Holy Spirit, can make a make and
So
it's not
good.
about I have to know all of these
Don't
people
need a
or
degree
I
to
have
do
have
that.
all of these degrees or I have to have
right.
jumped through all of these hundreds of hoops.
Right.
You have to love God.
Yeah.
And then you have to love people, and then you just have to go out there and do it. It's
That's good.
love your neighbor, go and make them a pot of tea, weed their garden, buy groceries for it's not hard.
Right.
It's not hard. I mean, how many Facebook things have we got of people, I paid for the guy behind me in line at the drive-through. It's not hard.
Right.
Just love people.
Right.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah, it is. Well, Casey, dear brother and friend.
Yes.
So good to be hanging out with you here. We did. We got there. And I don't think we broke any laws. I don't think we did anything too bad. I do. I think we can walk out of here and hold our heads high. But it's been fun and lots of great conversation. I love the conversation, particularly around architecture. And that's a big takeaway, I think, for all of us here today. And maybe there's other things for you to take away in there as well. But one of those standouts is, what are you building? Yeah. And how
are you building it?
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
Exactly. How are you building it? Are you building it in collaboration and with a heart to build with others? Or are you building it with arrogance that just goes, no, you don't. I don't need you to build with me. I don't need you to build with me, because in this city, I'm the one with all the answers. Like, no.
You mess up what I'm building.
Yeah, that's right. But just this sense of, we've all got a piece to give away, a piece to learn. I love that. So think about that. Pray about that right where you are. Maybe it starts in your family. Maybe it starts tomorrow morning at work. Whatever it is, just find a place to build in collaboration with others. But don't forget, here at the Power of New, plenty of ways you can get a hold of us. You can take a look at the website, Anothen.co/Pathfinder. Of course, we have our email. You can reach out to us at info@Anothen.co. That is info, info@Anothen.co. And also, don't forget to get hold of your free U Church app. That's one word, YOU Church. Why? Because you are the church, and you're going to get that wherever you get your apps on your app store. Lots of great content on there. These broadcasts are on there as well. Worship resources, teaching, training resources, all that on there. Totally free to give away. It'll help you to learn to start micro communities right where you are if you're looking to build some community around building together. We've got some tools on there for that. So reach out to us, info@Anothen.co. If you've got any questions around that, we love having conversations with people all around the world. We also have our coaching side with Anothen. You'll find that there on Anothen.co/Pathfinder. Down the bottom, we've got a little online scheduler. And then this content, you're going to find it on LinkedIn, on my LinkedIn markup. We are also going to find it on YouTube, which is at Anothen-Pathfinder as our YouTube channel. So please click subscribe there. You'll get notified when all the latest ones are coming out. And then the podcast version, you're going to find that wherever you get your podcasts as well. And of course, our donations there, you're going to see on the ticker below here. And also, if you're listening on the podcast, it'll be in the session notes, because your donations help make this content come alive. And if you're a US-based business or a US taxpayer, of course, that donation is always tax deductible. So,
remember,
yes, God wants to take you further and deeper into encounters with his always perfect love for greater impact, because he wants to love the world through you. God bless you guys. We'll look forward to seeing you here again next week.